in case we haven't said it loud and clear, Happy Mother's Day to all of you who are mothers. Okay? And we have something very special for you, something very appealing that we're going to save for the end of service. Okay? Something from Pat and myself, but something chosen by Pat. Okay? If I had chosen it, it might have been a number 2 pencil. But if my wife chooses it, you can bet it's going to be something very nice. Okay, women have that ability, whereas we guys, it's a little different. Okay, I'm going to take off my coat as is usual, and we're going to see a video to start with. Some of you, I know Jesse would know, but this week, Fortune magazine announced its 2013 list of the 500 highest earning companies in America. And there were some changes, like for example, Apple made the list, broke in at number 6, okay? But somebody was studying this thing and discovered something very interesting that I think you're going to get a kick out of watching. Okay, there's not a lot of action, most of it's talk, so the fact that the screen may not be that bright, you're not going to miss out anything, all right? It's not like a slam dunk by one of our NBA players or something like that. So, but you're going to enjoy the content. So as I set up, I'm going to turn down the lights.
We are celebrating Mother's Day with our series, Eye-Opening Moms. This morning, 4 sisters who climbed up the executive ranks of Fortune 500 companies and the amazing mom who got them there. They sat down with CBS News contributor and analyst Melody Hobson.
Get out in that kitchen and rattle those pots and pans.
When Connie Sullivan became a mom for the first time, Eisenhower was president. Marilyn Monroe just married Joe DiMaggio, and women most definitely were not in the boardroom.
Mama will feel like a fairy princess with a magic wand in a place like this.
Connie's daughters, the Sullivan sisters, defied all statistics, achieving not just 1, but 4 amazing success stories. Denise Morrison is CEO of the Campbell Soup Company. Maggie Wilderotter, CEO of $5 billion Frontier Communications. Younger sister Colleen Baskowski moved from an executive role at Expedia to Blackbird Mobile. Andrea Doling, once a senior vice president at AT&T, is now a champion horse jumper and fitness trainer.
Mom has always been a terrific role model for all of us. She was there to help, she was there to nurture, she was there to push.
In fact, Mom always taught us that it was important to be women and to be feminine. And she taught us that ambition is a part of femininity.
When I think about when you were saying that to your daughters, that was a very bold statement. Where did you come to this point of view that ambition and femininity went together?
When I grew up, I had a lot of ambition. I got a lot involved in a great many things that men do. I never really thought about it twice.
The Sullivan parents taught their girls to negotiate. Business plans were expected for toys they wanted, and they had to earn their own way.
Remember the job jars that we
Yes,
had?
yeah.
I mean, those were chores we had to do during the week.
And that's how we got our allowances.
So if they came home with a bad grade, what would you say?
You're grounded for life.
No, it was more that all you had to know was that she was disappointed. Right. That was powerful enough. We would get certain dollar amounts for A's and B's, and if we got C's, it was taken away from the A and B dollars that we would earn.
It's a club.
But it was always pushed to the next level, because like even if you brought home an A, my mom and my dad would both say, now how are we going to get to the A+?
When I got CEO of Campbell's, I called my parents and said, Mom, Dad, I achieved my life dream. I'm so honored to run this company. And they paused a minute. They said, that's great, Denise. What's your next goal?
Maggie says ambition came as easily as breathing. She remembers inviting then-President Nixon to attend a charity event, and in a gutsy move, sending tickets to the White House. Maggie was in 9th grade.
So I'm sitting in math class, and someone comes in, and my teacher says, Maggie, the White House is on the phone for you. And it was a staffer at the White House that called to inform me that unfortunately the president was busy and wasn't going to be able to attend the event. And then I said, well, how about the vice president? Is he going to come? No, unfortunately, he was busy too. I said, well, can you make sure they send a check for the tickets? Which they did.
Little sister Andrea was passionate about horses, and used all of her negotiating skills to get one.
Andrea was about 9 when I would pick up my grocery list every morning, and on the bottom it said, 1 horse, any kind, every day.
For how long?
Until she got
Till she got one.
She was relentless.
And I wrote a business plan that would be much more economical to purchase the horse in Ohio versus the East Coast pricing. And so I did my presentation to my parents, and they agreed that it was time.
As the girls who once shared bedrooms moved into separate boardrooms, they relied on each other for expert advice.
Denise is very strategic. Mag is a master networker. Andrea is an excellent communicator. And I think I'm probably more the creative, competitive type. So I think that we can bounce ideas off each other and tap into those skill sets.
And that's all part of my mom. She kind of showed us that you can have family, you can have career, you can balance, and you can do what you need to do. So I think that's been a gift she's given us.
When you hear them characterize you, do you think they're being accurate?
I'm a little bit of a control freak, and
That's an understatement.
Does she give you advice on who to marry?
oh no.
But I thought you like control.
She does. She would give us advice in her subtle way.
Yes.
I would tell them who they are going to marry.
Each sister has been married for more than 25 years, their parents 60 years.
Did they exceed your expectations?
Absolutely.
Good answer.
Absolutely. They all did. Every one of them.
We're not finished yet.
You're the mom CEO.
I am.
And if you were giving advice right now to other young mothers, what would you tell them?
Listen. If they have a problem and you listen, you'll help them with it. If they're happy about something, you'll listen and you'll keep doing it to them. Just be there. Be there for them all the time. That's what I did.
Good. I push you to.
You were
You're
great.
And Melody Hobson joins us from Seattle. Melody, I love this story. You know,
Thank you, my helpers from above. Okay. Yet, despite living in a limited life in a certain sense, she was able to impart the kind of character and virtue that the girls not only gain, but they continue to amplify and increase and use with spectacular results. I think some of you can relate to this family, to these women. Let me tell you another one. This is from a book by the name of The Call to Love. It's a Christian book, okay? And in this book, there was a story about a girl who became a Christian fairly young. And after becoming a Christian, she developed a burden for the people of India. And so, starting at a very young age, she had the dream of someday being a missionary in India. And so she oriented her whole life, her whole training, her whole education and development so that she can go because she loved the people there and she wanted to minister to them. And so she went through college, she went through seminary, she went through all the application processes and finally gets sent to India by some missionary board. And yet, after only being on the field for a small amount of time, she got this news from home. And this was the news, that her sister and brother-in-law had been killed in an auto accident. And so she was being asked to come back home from India to take care of the 4 young children. What's she going to do? Her whole life dream, to serve the Lord, to help and to love the people of India. Well, she responded to the call, and she came back home. And so she devoted herself to these 4 children, and she gave to them all the kind of love and attention and training and care that she would have given to the people of India. And at the time when the book was published in the year 2000, guess what the end of the story was? The woman had gotten old. She had never gone back. Okay? But the 4 children had caught from her the love for India, the people, the work of God in India. And so all 4 of them were now in India, serving in her place. She had quadrupled, gone far beyond her hopes and dreams and expectations. And we see how God works such a wonderful, wonderful way. So, today we're going to be looking at a passage that is very popular for Mother's Day. But we see in there not just a mother, we see a grandmother as well. And you know, I want to expand that application beyond mothers, beyond even grandmothers, because everybody plays a part. In my family, too often, the news that my kids have to deliver, you know who hears it first? No, not even Mom. Certainly not me, Thomas. You know who hears it first? Grandma. Okay. That's just the way it is, okay? Because they didn't have to be disciplined by Grandma. But she has a tremendous influence in their lives. And then they have an auntie, Pat's brother's wife, and she exercises an influence, you know? And it's not just women, people. You've heard of surrogacy? Well, surrogacy was taking place since forever. Later on this year, I'm going to be officiating a wedding. But I have to wear 2 hats. Not only am I going to be up front officiating the wedding, I'm going to be walking the bride down the aisle. Not my daughter. This girl from Singapore, whom I have been surrogate father since she started in this country. And there's, you know, you think in your life, there's many people with whom you've had that kind of closeness, and you've had passing opportunities sometimes. Other times, long-term opportunities. You know, I have friends whose strongest influence in their lives was not even somebody biological or through marriage, but it was their nanny. You know, and they would make the trip all the way back to Hong Kong for their nanny's funeral. Strong impression. So we're talking about that kind of spiritual influence and the good influence in our lives. If we've been so fortunate to give it, great. If we have been so fortunate to receive it, let us not drop the ball, but let us be part of that amplification process. One of the problems in major corporations is that the people at the top say, we have this vision for the company, and they tell it to the next level of leadership. And one of the big problems at each level down, Instead of this message being clear and direct and of equal strength, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and diminishes, so that by the time the people on the front lines who are actually building the product, when they hear about it, they could care less. It's just another program. It's just another slogan. We don't want that to happen, because the kingdom of God, this world, the lives of others and our own, is far too important. So I want you to turn with me to 2 Timothy chapter 1. And it's a passage that is kind of interesting. And in a sense, people miss the best parts of it. The passage we're going to be looking at starts at verse 3. And it goes, and we're just going to take it to verse 7. Maybe I'm going to push it past the paragraph to verse 8. This whole paragraph in my Bible is 7 lines long. Okay? In the Greek, it's one sentence. Okay? So this one thought that Paul wanted to communicate, and we should keep all the information together. Otherwise, you don't really get it. And let me summarize what the real message of this, because too often nobody ever says it. In these final words, because this is the final letter that Paul writes, he speaks to a beloved spiritual son, Timothy, whom he has personally put into Christian ministry. And what Paul is going to do is he's going to challenge Timothy as a Christian man and as a Christian leader to live up to the imprint and the legacy of his mother and his grandmother. And he does it in a variety of ways. Okay? So I'm going to read it to you, but I'm going to read it to you so that you understand how the Greek meant it to be understood. So ignore what's up there, listen to me instead, because you're going to get real confused, like watching a Chinese movie with English subtitles. Okay, you're going to get all messed up. Okay, so follow along. Verse 3. I thank God whom I serve, as did my ancestors, with a clear conscience. As I remember you constantly in my prayers night and day, as I remember your tears, I long to see you, that I may be filled with joy. I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now, I am sure, dwells in you as well. Verse 6. For this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God gave us a spirit, not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. And let me go ahead and push into the next paragraph, verse 8. Therefore, do not be ashamed of the testimony about our Lord, nor of me his prisoner, but share in suffering for the gospel by the power of God. And that is the bottom line that he is really moving toward. And this is what I want you to hear through the message, through this Mother's Day morning presentation. For those of us who are in the position of influencing and impacting and imprinting, these are our questions. What kind of legacy are we providing? Is it of an authentic faith, a faith that says that we live and breathe God and his greatness? Are we influencing to the point that we are making an impact, an imprint, or are we just a mere fading shadow? Then, the flip side for those of us who have the opportunity to benefit from such impact, to receive this kind of legacy of authentic faith, a faith that's the real deal. The question would be, are we living up to it to the extent that it's something that is worthy to be passed on to someone else? Or will it die with us like a whimper because we have dampened the faith instead of amplifying the faith? So those are the two questions I want you to have in mind. Now we're going to go back through the passage because it's God's word that we are most interested in. So I go to verse 3. And this is what he says. I thank God whom I serve, but not only I, but my ancestors did too. And they did their very best. They had a clear conscience. And I've checked myself, and I can see I have a clear conscience about how I'm doing it. And so he is raising two topics in this verse. He says, one, there is the question of legacy and living up to it. And two, there are examples. The example of his ancestors, and later on Paul is going to set himself up as an example for Timothy. And, in this passage, later on, he's going to talk about some others who are examples that he should not follow. Some of Paul's co-workers in verse 15. He says, you are aware that all who are in Asia turned away from me. Just like Jesus, he lost all of his followers, all of his helpers, all of his workers. You ever do a project? Your mom says, hey, I want you guys to go and get the leaves out of the yard. And all four of you and your brothers and sisters go trooping out. And one by one, your siblings sneak away. And pretty soon you look around, you're the only guy raking the leaves. That's kind of what happened with Paul here. They all disappeared. And he names a name, among whom are Phygellus and Hermogenes. See, God is a very personal God, and he knows. He knows us personally, individually, by name, and he takes note. So he gives good examples and bad examples. And he says, just like I followed the example that I had, Timothy, I want you to also follow that example and to have a clear conscience about it. Then, verse 4, as I remember your tears, I long to see you, that I may be filled with joy. I am reminded, okay? He is reminded, and the scholars don't know what caused him to remember the faith of the grandmother and the mother. And my thinking is that as he thinks of the challenge that he's going to lay for Timothy, and he's wondering, is Timothy going to be able to cut it? Or is he going to turn tail and run like those other guys? Paul takes comfort in knowing his roots. He takes comfort in knowing his stock. And he says, and he uses this. And this is the most important thing he uses, one of the most important things that he starts with to encourage Timothy. I am reminded of your sincere faith. Okay, he acknowledges that he has it. But this faith came where? First in your grandmother, then your mother. And then Paul gets a little redundant here, and he says, and now, well, he already said and now, okay? But he says, and now I am sure. He's expressing confidence, okay? Parenting tip, express confidence in your kids, okay? The Chinese way, all right? It doesn't work. Express confidence. He says, now I am sure dwells in you as well. So, we see a baton of faith being passed from stage to stage. You got to remember, these two women, Lois and Eunice, lived in a place called Lystra. Lystra had a small Jewish community. So there probably weren't that many Jewish males. So they both ended up marrying Greeks. That's why Timothy is not circumcised. All right? They don't have the kind of influence to be able to say, hey, we're Jewish, we're going to do it this way. The other hardship that these women had to do and deal with is this. The scholars think that Lois had lost her husband to death, and Eunice's husband had probably run away when Timothy was quite young. And so these two women probably had to band together to survive and to raise this one son. Talk about growing up with handicap. Talk about parenting with handicaps. And so this little family would have to struggle. And they say that according to the way it's written up and how they're described, these were probably good practicing Jews. And it says that they were teaching Timothy the scriptures when he was very young. But they became believers. And probably Lois, the grandmother, became a believer when Paul came to Lystra in Acts chapter 15. And then when he comes back on his second trip and he's checking up on the churches that he started, he comes to Lystra and he meets Timothy and he hears from everybody what a great guy he is, how reliable, and how strong he is in the Lord. And so at that point, Paul takes Timothy and enlists him to be his mentee and his helper in his second missionary journey. And so Paul becomes, for Timothy, a what? A father figure. Spiritually and in the skills of life that he could not otherwise have learned. And he says to Timothy, so you have an indwelling faith. And what that means is that the Christianity that Timothy and his mom and his grandmother had shined from within. It's a part of them. Their faith marks every part of their life because it comes from within. If we were saying this was a disease, we would say they are carriers, not merely those who have been exposed. In the church every Sunday, we have in the congregation people who are merely exposed but are not carriers. They don't have an indwelling faith. Their faith exists only when they come into the church. That's not an indwelling faith. And you got to start with that indwelling faith. And you can't get it handed down. It's got to be your own. It doesn't come from exposure. But the word that Paul used several times to describe this faith is, he says, it's a sincere faith. And this word sincere comes from the stage. It comes talking about people who are acting and who are taking on various roles. And they can turn it on and they can turn it off. And he says, no, for you, it's woven right into your soul, into the core of your being. It's not something you can turn on and turn off. It's not like a coat. It gets cold, you put it on, it gets warm, you take it off. And so this is what he says. And I was trying really hard to figure out how to explain sincere faith to you. Let me illustrate. There was a debate one day among 4 pastors. Okay? And as they were debating, it turned out that the topic was which version of the Bible, which translation is the best. And one guy says, King James. Nobody did English like William Shakespeare and the people of his day. Such glorious beauty, such turns of phrases. That's the first guy. Second guy said, yeah, but who can understand it? I'm an immigrant. No way can I handle Shakespearean English. And so I like the New American Standard because it's literal and it's exact. Third pastor says, yeah, I know the New American Standard is nice, but it is so literal that it's impossible to read and sometimes hard to make sense. It takes me so long just to figure out a sentence in the New American Standard. What I like is the modern version. I like the NIV. I'm picking on those four because we don't use that over here, okay? Just kidding. Then the last passage is, well, you know, when it comes right down to it, the translation I like best was my mother's translation. This is what? Your mother's a Bible scholar? She translated the Bible for you? And he says, yes, she did. She translated it into her daily life, and it was through her translation that I came to faith. You know, it's what we see. What we see is what we will get. And if they don't see, they don't get. And so many Christian families, when the kids walk away from God, when they hit high school and college, it's because they did not see an indwelling faith, a sincere faith. And that's what we have to work on, and we're going to talk about it that way and find out what are some of the components for a sincere faith. You know, when I was in law school, my closest friend was a Jewish kid from New York. His name was Mark. And one day he had taken me to Cantor's for my first Jewish deli experience, all right? And we had matzo ball soup, and he could order some crepe lox and stuff like that, gefilte fish. Anyway, I says, Mark, how Jewish are you? And he says, only for my grandmother's sake. I thought, Mark, what a tragedy. Your people have such a rich history, such a rich culture, such a rich legacy. I said, Mark, I'm 100% Chinese, but I'm 100% American too. Okay? Too many Christians are Christians for their mother's sake, for their father's sake. They don't have indwelling faith. It isn't the kind of sincere faith that we need. We want to be 100%. And that's one of the first things. It needs to be a personal, indwelling, I own it, it's real, it's mine. That's the first thing that makes for a sincere faith. Second thing that makes for a sincere faith is consistency. Consistency. You know, when the Bible says when you choose a pastor, when you choose a deacon, where do you check? You check the home life. Right? Because anybody can put on an act. Some people are great at work, admired by all the staff. But when they come home, they're terrible to live with. You can't be on a roll at different places. When Peter was insincere, when the Gentiles showed up, he says, this is the way I'm going to behave. Then when the Jewish people showed up, he says, hey, I'm going to be like the Jewish people. Paul called him to his face and says, you hypocrite. And he used the same word for sincerity here. And that's why you need to have that kind of sincerity to be consistent. The third ingredient of a sincere faith is it's got to persist. It's got to have staying power. Any of us can go to church in elementary school. We might make it through junior high, high school. But does it have staying power through college, young adult? I'll tell you, I practiced law. It was hard to exercise and to live my faith. in the legal arena, where destruction was the main rule of operation. Attack, attack, attack. You want to turn the other cheek? You think how many times you're going to have to turn the other cheek. And so you need to have that ability to persist. And when you see it persisting from Lois to Eunice to Timothy, you know that this is something very, very precious. See, Paul is excited here. He doesn't sound excited, but Timothy knew he was excited. You know why? This is Paul's last letter. He is waiting to be executed. And like the dying words of a man just before death row and execution, these have major importance. And he's giving his final bit of advice to this guy who the record shows is probably a little bit timid. He may have had physical problems. Paul had to say to the church when he sent them, and he sent them to Ephesus, which was the toughest church, take it easy on the guy. Okay? He says, you know what? I'm going to need you to stand up for your faith. I'm going to need you to follow my example and suffer for your faith. And you know what? When you have to do that, guess what? I'm not going to be here anymore. You're going to have to stand alone. But I think you can do it because you have a foundation of sincere faith from Lois and Eunice. Wow. That's great. Moms, you have an influence like nobody. And I challenge you to make that influence, to turn it into an impact so that it leaves an imprint, so that it will have staying power and it will be thorough. And the way to do it is, do they know you love them unconditionally? I think moms do, but we don't always show it. I learned an expression recently. I don't know if Maya Angelou is the one who originated it, but this is her expression. When your kids walk into the room, do your eyes light up? I know with grandmothers that happens, right? You need to follow an example. Watch the grandmothers in action. They light up. That is what makes that heart soft and pliable. Remember that legacy is destiny. Moms, if God should call you to let go of them for full-time Christian service, like he did with Timothy and Lois and Eunice had to give them up, can you do it? That is the surest way to express your faith and to make an impact. Children, better than a Hallmark card, better than a gift from CVS or even Coach, okay? Better than all of that, Paul says to Timothy, guard the deposit of faith that you have received. Now, faith is a living thing. I've had this 3-year experience at my house. I have 2 orchid plants that I've been trying to nurture and keep alive. All right? I started with 4, so I've killed 2. But the other 2 have come back now, and this year, more blossoms than ever. Living things need to grow. If our faith is to persist, it needs to grow. You can't live on yesterday's faith. You can't live on a child's faith. It's got to become taller, bigger, more robust. It's got to move forward. It's got to be yours. But it's got to increase and expand so that you can amplify this faith. And so, whether you're a surrogate like me on Mother's Day, okay? Or you're a grandmother, or you're a mother, or you're an auntie, whether you do it for life skills, whether you do it for their faith. We all influence. Not a single person in this room is not an influencer. The only question, are you a good influence or a bad influence? Every one of us is constantly being influenced. When we are influenced for good, will we drop the ball? Will we dampen the message and the power of faith? Or will we amplify it so that there is something worthwhile to go to the next generation? So, I promised something special for Mother's Day.